And welcome back. So, a little bit of a status update on our Project X Candy Apple Red 1500 here is that we did pass our annual inspection. So we're just waiting for the new registration and everything to arrive. But as it stands now, we've got another year before we have to get another inspection, which means we can now start looking into and finalizing our plans for the engine upgrade. But I'll get more into that at the end of this particular video. But in this video, when we were taking the vehicle down to get the safety recall done for the shift interlock and the before mentioned safety or before mentioned state inspection, I noticed when trying to set to cruise control that it wouldn't set. And on this particular year and model of Ram, the cruise control functionality is controlled by these group of 4 buttons here on the steering wheel. Sometimes you've got a little auxiliary kind of like a bank of switches on a stick that'll come out below the steering wheel here, usually in the lower right hand corner. Sometimes you have it there, and sometimes you have them up here in the steering wheel. Ours happens to be here up in your steering wheel. You know, sometimes you'll have a set of radio controls here for the Uconnect, and which in that case usually means you'll then have it down here in the lower right. But in our case, ours is here. So what we need to do, and I got it home, hooked up a scan tool to it, and it's basically complaining about the resistance values that it's checking these bank of circuits, these switches with. It's basically looking at the resistance values of these switches as you depress them, and it's seeing something that it doesn't like. So either they're dirty or there's some kind of connection issue. But the fact that it was at least setting a code tells me that our wiring is somewhat intact between here and the internal network of the truck itself, because it could tell that I was trying to push these buttons. It just wasn't engaging them. So the fix online for it seems to be, what everyone is saying, is to replace this bank of switches based on the codes that were presenting themselves. And I should be able to, I'll hook up a scan tool once we're done, and I'll show you what those 2 codes were. But they both dealt with resistance and circuit issues within this bank of switches here. That part number, at least again in this particular make, model, and Ram's case, is right there. Let's see if I can get it to where it's not going to glare on you. There we go. So what we need to do, and we've already taken the first step in our project truck here, and we've disconnected the battery, and we've given the system a couple minutes to bleed down as a safety precaution, because we don't want to inadvertently set this airbag off, because part of this is we at least have to disassemble it enough and get the airbag out to get to the trim screws underneath to be able to pull the trim ring off, and then finally be able to get our bank of switches out. We don't have to remove the entire steering wheel per the instructions. We just have to get this upper trim piece off so we can get behind here and hit some releases that release 3 airbag clips. And kind of what they have you do is rotate the steering wheel around kind of like this, and then also like this, kind of moving it up to the top and up to the top again, and then finally rotating the steering wheel around so the bottom is now facing up, mainly because, again, we're going to remove this piece of trim here, which will give us access into the rear of it, and then we can kind of pop these 3 clips. Now, yeah, they want you to use a specialty tool for doing that, and you can kind of see it just looks like a long piece of metal with a little hook on the end. I don't have that actual tool. What I'm going to try to use is this tool here, which is a trim removal tool. It's used to help pull the Christmas tree clips out of trim panels. And as you can see, it looks pretty close to the little angled tool with a little foot on it that they say you should be using. So we're going to give this a shot and see if we can at least get those clips to bend back. If that doesn't work, we'll see what else we can find. But the first thing I'm going to do is just take a Torx bit per their instructions, and I believe it's, yeah, through this channel here, I believe through that channel there, and we're just going to take this top cover off here, and then we'll get on to the next piece, which is trying to get behind here and see if we can get these clips undone. So let me get this top cover off and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we took the steering wheel adjuster and just pushed the steering wheel down as low as it would go to help get the back cover off. It is two Torx bits, just like the instruction says. You can see they're fairly long, coarse threaded screw. It is a Torx. It is a T15. You will need a fairly long bit to get up in here in order to reach it, but you can see what I'm using. It's just a Torx driver. I don't want to call it a Torx screwdriver because it's, well, I guess you could call it that, but that was long enough to get up in there and get those loosened up. But steering wheels, again, angled down as low as we can get it just to help get this back cover off. And as you can see here, just have to finagle the cover a little bit to get it to let go. And there we go. There's not too much holding that cover on once you've got those screws off and you've got everything tilted forward. So apparently what we're looking for is behind here, and there should be 3 of them. Let's see, it should be like up in the corners here, here, and then one down on the bottom center. But the first 2, the question is, can we reach in there to get those out? And I think what we're looking for is, I'm going to have to see if I can finagle my way in there. I may have to look in through the front windshield in order to see it. You may actually be able to see it better than I can. I'm trying to look through the viewfinder of the camera. I think what we're looking for is through here, and what it's going to be is just like a loop or a hook that we can just it's going to look like a loop of metal, almost like a big loop of a kind of like a metal stapler that we can push the loop out of the way to get it off the clip. But okay, let me pause you so I can kind of get where you're at and see if I can see this thing. Like I said, I may not be able to get this on camera, but I'll see what I can do. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our first clip off, but I'm going to show you what I'm doing here. Our first thought of using this trim removal tool, this actually would have worked quite well, but it's just a little bit too long to get back in there because of the amount of distance that you have between the back of the steering wheel and the gauge cluster. What I'm finding works pretty well is a small flat tip screwdriver about this long. And because of the space that you have in here, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. So per the manual, the easiest thing to do, and I'm going to try to get it lined up and get you into the shot here. Hopefully you can see that. You'll see that in that mirror, you'll see a little wire loop around kind of a black peg. Hopefully you can see a little bit better there. And then what you can do is just use the mirror with a small flat blade screwdriver, get up underneath the wire loop, and then pry it upwards until it clears the black tab it's looped around. And then you can give a little bit of a pull onto that corner of the airbag, and then that should get that retaining clip to pop off. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And as you can see, we're just rotating the steering wheel to get the particular corner we're working on up towards the top center, so it's just easier to get in there and work with. So I'm going to see if I can get the 2 remaining retaining clips off, and I'll bring you back. One moment. So yeah, definitely having a mirror with this makes this a lot easier to do. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our 3 tabs that were depressed, and what you're doing when you're picking up on that tab is you're taking the loops here that are attached to the airbag and you're pulling them forward like this. You're kind of bending them forward to get them to release off of these tabs that you see in here, and there's 3 of them there. And just remember, that's this bottom center one, that's the bottom of the airbag. And the best tool I found is I had to go back and get a slightly different flat tip screwdriver. Has a pretty narrow point, but it's just long enough to get in there, get underneath that hook, but also not be too long where you don't have, you know, some decent swing with it without hitting the cluster. So that's about the size of it there. So what, about 4, maybe 4 or 5 inch small flat blades, you know, obviously probably about double the size of maybe a pocket flat blade screwdriver. But it seems to work pretty good. But if you've got access to the actual tool to bend that back, or if your parts store has the tool that you can actually rent to do that, I would probably suggest go getting the tool. Like I said, had to fight with it a little bit, and it did help to have a mirror back there to kind of help see what was going on. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to squeeze these tabs, get the airbag disconnected, and just be careful with it. And again, I believe these are color coded as far as the orientation, but we're going to remember that the blue with the yellow, blue and yellow connector go here with the airbag facing this way. This is obviously the down position of the airbag, so that connector is going to face us and the other connector is going to face away. So I'm going to get these disconnected, and then we're going to rotate the steering wheel and get it back into center. And then we're going to see about, I believe it's just removing some Phillips screws in here to get the front trim piece off of the wheel so we can dismount our switches. So let me go ahead and take care of this airbag and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So it's a mixture of screws that hold this trim piece on. As you can see, the trim piece also holds our switches. So there's 4 screws inside of here that are underneath the airbag. The top are Torx screws, which I believe were that is a T15, nope, they're T20s. So you got a couple of T20 Torx bits at the top corners, and you have Phillips screws on the bottom, on the back of the steering wheel, right here on the bottom, here and here, where you see these little indents at. You have another set of Phillips screws in there. You may need a stubby Phillips to get those out kind of clearance, or you can just kind of rock the steering wheel from left to right like this a little bit in order to get in there with a standard Phillips to back those out. Once you have them backed out, you can see this piece is now loose. We've got a little bit of free play here to work with, but not much, because let's see, you've got a part of the wiring harness comes this way off the center connector, part of it goes that way. Now it looks like we should be able to potentially disconnect this connector here in the center, but I don't really want to do that because I don't want to completely remove the steering wheel. We may have enough slack in our cabling. There we go. Get this loose. Yeah, we may have enough slack in the cabling that we could just kind of rotate it like this and gain access to the switch. You're going to go upside down for a second, sorry, but you can see our switch there. Yeah, so we should just be able to remove the 2 Phillips screws you see there and the connector and get that replaced and go ahead and do our reassembly. So that's what I'm going to do with it, because like I said, I don't want to disassemble it any further than I already have. And whew, it's going to be a hot one out here today, let me tell you. And yeah, let me do that. So I'm going to, again, just tilt it up to get access through the steering wheel. We're going to remove it, replace it, and I'll bring you back when we do the reassembly. One moment. And welcome back. So went ahead and got our new module in. This is our old module here. It's held in by those 3 screws you saw earlier to let you know they are Torx bits. They're 3 T10 Torx screws that go in the back of that. Now this is just threading into this plastic piece of trim here, so you know, no need to break out Thor's full strength hammer when you're tightening those down, if you know what I mean. As for the reason of failure, as long as this is I think the reason why we went after the bank of switches and not the wiring, because you remember earlier we commented when we were pressing these and I ran a scan tool in the truck, it came up with a resistance fault on these. So it tells me it sees the buttons, and it also tells us that it knew we were trying to engage cruise control, but it refused because it didn't like what it was seeing for an output on this, mainly a resistance check. Now the reason why I think this failed is that this is sticky. It's like sugary drink type sticky all along the edge here. Now this is my theory, but seeing that this is on the right hand side next to where the cup holders would normally be in any standard Ram, and knowing that the sheer amount of other sugary snacks we cleared out of this truck when we were redoing the interior, I'm gonna fathom a guess here that chances are the previous owner was also into sugary drinks, whether that be soda, sweet tea, whatever, probably holding in right hand while driving, and probably got some content splashed on these buttons, maybe once, maybe twice, who knows. But I'd be willing to bet you, again, just because it's sticky, like sugar type sticky, that's probably what did this switch in. Again, just a theory. So we're going to go ahead and work on getting this all buttoned back up and reassembled. Remember, there's the 2 screws you see down here at the bottom, which are also flat tip. I'm sorry, not flat tip, but Phillips. 2 bottom ones here that are Phillips, and 2 Torx, which are there top, and then I'll get this trim ring back in. So we're to work on getting this reassembled, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our 4 screws here, and the 2 bottom screws, and the bottom pad of our trim panel. We've got that reinstalled. We already put the airbag back in. Just remember, you got a Christmas tree clip. It goes in the bottom center of the bag right there. And remember that these are color coded. You know, the black to black connector, yellow to yellow connector. And then what should happen is once we press this in place, those 3 loops, so there's 3 eyelets holding, I guess you could call them springs in a sense, should snap back in place and grab a hold of all 3 of the mounting locations. Let me get you some light. So you'll have a mounting location right here at the bottom of the flashlight. You see right there. And then of course 1 up here in the corner and 1 over here in the corner. They should just snap back in place. So I'm going to work on getting this airbag back in. I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. I got you zoomed in on the scan tool, keys in ignition. We're just going to do a rescan here. I don't think we're going to see the codes that I wanted to show you because we did pull the battery, and I don't think those codes were in a set fashion. I believe they were pending, and because of that, it's more than likely wiped them out, unfortunately. But just to reiterate, the reason why we went after that bank of switches was because it was showing a resistance issue within that bank of switches when we want to engage or turn on the cruise control system. Yeah, and you can see here everything is just in a stored status, 1 active status, which if you've watched the videos previously on this channel, you know that we're always going to have this heated steering wheel error because the heated seat module we took out of our donor RAM that we grafted into this one, we only used it for the heated seats. We didn't move over the steering wheel, so that module is still looking for the steering wheel to be present, which it'll never see, but that's the reason why we had the fault. So no harm, no foul there. Everything else you can see is in a normal status, again, because the battery was pulled, and unfortunately those codes showing that resistance error within that bank of switches weren't in a set state before I pulled the battery, so my fault on that one. So what I'm going to do is, and the reason why you may see this one, the additional CAN interior ECU detected, remember we took it in for recall service work, and that was for the transmission shift interlock. When they did that, part of the recall was they upgraded all the software in any truck modules that needed it. So they basically flashed the entire truck back to its base configuration. And since we added the heated seats, the quad headlights, the remote start, we did all that via Alpha OBD, and it didn't come from the factory that way. It turned those settings off. So when we did get the truck back from having service work done and its annual inspection done, we did have to go into that Alpha OBD software and turn those options back on, which again, it had no issue doing, even with the the updates that they did to the truck. But with that being said, what I'm going to do next is pause you. And I'm going to get you zoomed in on the dash, and like I said, we won't be able to set the cruise control obviously because the truck's not in motion, but we should be able to turn the system on and see the indicator on the dash, which is what we couldn't do before. So one moment. And welcome back. So I'm going to get you as close to the dash as I can here. You're going to have a little bit of a glare, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit the on-off button to turn on the cruise system, and we should see an indicator light in the lower right there of the display, and there we go. Beautiful, we do. So that little gauge, that little speedometer icon you saw that just came on, I'm going to turn the system off again, on again, and off again. When you see that icon show up, that means the cruise control system has been turned on at that point, which that's already an improvement versus what we were seeing before, where we would hit this button and we would get nothing at all. So let me turn that off, and I'm going to shut the truck off. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop you so I can zoom you out, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. Okay, that's better. Got you zoomed out a little bit so you get a little bit bigger of a picture here. So with that being said, just to kind of recap what we did when we were taking it for a little bit of a drive to get the service work, a recall work, and the inspection done to it, we noticed that we could hit the on button for our cruise control and we wouldn't get the result we would expect on the dash. It wasn't turning the system on. So when I code scanned it, I got two codes that pointed directly back to a resistance value or resistance fault within this bank of switches. The reason why we went after this on just those codes alone, because since it registered a fault and it knew we were trying to hit the button, that told me that the wiring between here and the internal of the truck was okay, was basically good to go. So I just went ahead and bit the bullet at that point, knowing the wiring was good, and bought a new bank of switches, which in this case did fix our problem. Now, one thing we don't have on this particular model, and again, like I said earlier, you may have a type of model where it comes out on a stick on the lower right. That's your cruise control option because you've got a different type of steering wheel and a different set of buttons. And I think if I remember correctly, you can get an alternate version of this that has the U-Connect buttons at top, if I remember correctly. And if that's the case, you know, when we do the engine rebuild, we may tear the steering wheel apart again and try for that, considering that we did take the radio out of our parts RAM that has the U-Connect buttons on it. The wiring within the steering wheel may support the slightly different module. Again, I'll have to see if one's available. And like I said, when we get around to doing the engine work and we have the truck down for maintenance, we may switch it out and just see if it works. But with that being said, it's not too difficult of a job to do. There's Torx fasteners, there's Phillips fasteners on this, as you saw. The worst part of it was getting the catches for the airbag on the corners and the one down here at the bottom to release. Again, we found out that using a screwdriver, as you can see there, one there probably about double the length of a normal pocket flat blade screwdriver was enough to get in there and pry up on those hooks to get them to release. Having a mirror, in this case, you can see a little kitty mirror, that helped out quite a bit from being able to just kind of put it back here once this top piece was removed and be able to see kind of what we're fishing for. Now, if you've got this tool, or if your automotive store can rent you this tool, and I'd probably suggest getting it. It would more than likely make this job a lot easier to do, but it is doable with a standard flat tip. Again, just be careful that when you're in the air, because you are dealing with airbag wires, you make sure that you disconnect the battery. And in this particular model of Ram's case, the manual states to give it about 2 minutes for the system to discharge before you start handling this. And also, even though you've discharged it, it is an airbag. Just be extremely careful with the electrical connections on it. You don't want to damage those, because then you'll start getting an airbag fault. Again, I'm not saying it to try to deter you. Just, you know, be mindful of these things. Like I said, it's overall pretty straightforward job to do. Worst of it was just getting the airbag out. After that, pretty straightforward to get this trim piece off and swap out that bank of switches. So with that being said, I like to save this for the end of the video, is that, as you know, we did pass our state inspection. So we now have a year, a little bit more than a year, because the inspection actually isn't due until the end of June. So the nice thing is we have about a year and a month or so, I think, at this point, before we have to do it again. So we've got plenty of time to get the rest of our parts in, pull the motor, do the work that we need to do, and start to get things reassembled. But for now, and I will definitely do a follow-up video on this, is that we are just waiting for parts to arrive at this point. The cam hasn't arrived yet, but that was going to be a custom grind per our tuner, so it may be a little while yet before Comp Cams gets to that particular order and produces that part for us. But we have gotten some items in, like lifters, hardened push rods, valve springs, seats, things of that nature, retainers. I still have to put an order together for the bits and pieces that we don't have for the engine reassembly, such as gaskets and seals and things of that nature. So I'll have to get a list together and get that on order. Don't worry, like I said, we will be doing a follow-up video, and like we always do with our engine builds, and kind of going over all the new parts as they come in and kind of what will be going into the engine. But for now, what you can see, obviously, if you've been following the series, if not, I strongly encourage you to go back and kind of watch the progress of this particular Ram. But just to recap you, remember this was a parts Ram that was purchased from auction about a year and a month ago at this point. We originally purchased it to be a parts Ram for our 2009 TRX. We elected to not use it as a parts Ram. We were able to salvage the 2009 without pulling pieces off of this old girl. So once the 2009 was out, we then started on this one. And if you, as you can see, remember, we did the entire interior swap. So we took the sport interior out of our blue 1500 parts Ram up there, swapped it out here. We enabled features that this truck did not have originally, such as heated and ventilated seats, quad headlights, remote start, and did a very, very nice, like I said, just kind of overall adding bits and pieces and taking what is an ST. This is originally an ST trim level Ram, which is kind of one of the base trim levels you can get, and working on upgrading it to basically customize it, make it look how we want it to look. And also to demonstrate that a lot of these pieces on these 4th gen Rams are interchangeable, such as you saw that we took the seats and the console and the dash and basically dropped it right in. We didn't have to make bolt holes or come up with brackets that weren't there. As long as you saw on the console, as long as we had the brackets that came with the console, it already had provisions in the cab to bolt that stuff down without having to create it. So it's actually kind of cool. But with that being said, going a little bit of a tangent here, the next thing coming up will be getting the engine parts in and then prepping this to get the engine pulled and start the build up on the performance of this. And what we are going to go with is what a lot of tuners would typically call a stage 2.5 cam, but it's going to be a custom ground cam. It's going to be grind for power, as well as the ability to add a supercharger at a later date. So we will build the engine up, get it tuned without the supercharger, see how that looks, and then we'll add the supercharger in at some point after the fact. We've also got rear end work that we want to do to the differential. Basically, I guess what I'm trying to say, to take a long story short, stop the rambling here, we've got a lot more content coming up on this truck. So if you haven't subscribed already, please consider to do so. For those of you who have, thank you very, very much. We have surpassed the 1,500 subscriber count, and we are on a very, very nice channel growth curve at this point, and I would love to continue that growth. Again, the more subscribers equals more views. More views helps the channel out considerably and makes it easier to bring a lot of this content your direction. And I've had requests in the past to do transmission work. Don't worry, we'll also be doing transmission work as part of the build-up on this Ram. Now, one thing that we did have done, and I haven't told you this till now, I'm getting ready to show it to you. When they were doing the service work on this, and it was already in there getting that safety recall again for that shift interlock fixed, we went ahead, as well as getting the inspection done, as you well know, went ahead and had them take care of the bed a little bit. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. There you go. Get a look at that. If you've seen the previous videos, you know that should look like a night and day difference. Now you've got some pollen in there. I apologize. A little bit dirty, but we went ahead, and since their guy was there that does their spray in bed liners, as you can see, we went ahead and had them spray in basically a nice spray in bed liner to help protect the bed. If you remember, we were just starting to get some rust spots and things of that nature in the bed of this, and in order to protect that, to keep it from getting any worse, as you can see, we went ahead and had them spray it. But night and day difference. After we had it sprayed and we brought it back to the house, we did change out the plastic end caps on both sides of the rails. These are actually Dorman end caps, believe it or not. I couldn't get the Mopar or any other ones, but to be honest with you, even though they're Dorman parts, they fit just fine. Now this is an OEM. We went ahead and replaced this cap as well across the tailgate. This is an OEM one. These pins come out. This is the only piece that has pins. You pull these pins out of here. They're just a standard plastic push pins, and then they're clips, and you could just pop it up. And on this one, we were able to just pop this one up, get all the clips off, and then clip the new one in place. Now if you're having trouble getting this out, you may have to remove this little access panel right here, and allow you to get underneath and squeeze the clips in. But on these side rails, we were able to just kind of get it started and pull up on it and get all the old clips off and clip the new ones in. But anyway, I digress. Much better looking bed on this one now that it's been sprayed. So one other thing, sorry, I'll show this to you. You'll notice we've been debadged. We also went ahead before we took it down to the service work and did the debadging on it, so no more big block letters in chrome. If you have watched this channel for a while, you know that I don't really care for chrome all that much on vehicles, but this also helps with the stealth look that we're going for. So no indication of, I mean, obviously you can tell it's a Ram just by its external features, but no indication whether it's a 1500, 2500, you know, so on and so forth. And again, I kind of like the look better without having the big block letters on the side, but if you're a fan of that, then, you know, so be it. To each their own. I like the look of it with it being debadged. So just to kind of catch you up, we've debadged it, put in a spray-in bed liner, and replaced some trim on the bed itself. And don't worry, we have a plan for these door handles yet. That'll be in a different video, but we will address it. So that being said, a little bit of a ramble there, but I wanted to catch you up on the current status of it. And now that we have a functional cruise control, that takes care of this one as well. So again, we're going to be waiting for parts to come in. Once the bulk of those parts come in, we'll definitely do a video on it, do a parts inventory, and kind of show you some of the nice bells and whistles that'll be going into the engine buildup. But with that being said, I will let you go, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.